Okay, so now I'm gonna show you how I start to mix with the bass line. I'm gonna show you some tricks how you get the sub bass right. About the sub bass, I have to say it's pretty hard to get a sub bass if you don't have a system which is a full range system, and if you don't have a linear room response, which means you have a bass traps in your well and that it's treated very good. But I'm gonna show you a way how you can at least get it as good as possible. The best way, it's a little bit like operating in the dark, because if you cannot hear clearly what you're doing, because your speaker cannot reproduce such low frequencies, and your room is not responding in a linear objective way, then it's pretty hard to get the sub bass level right. But since we are here focusing on solutions, I will still show you how I have done it before I have had a treated room and a full range playback system, and you can still get very good results with it. So when I start to mix, I first mix the bass line, and the kick drum already, it's a kick drum sample, and I didn't apply any processing to it because it already sounds perfect. So I start to let the kick drum peak at around -10 dB full scale. Then you have a good headroom for the mastering process. Perfect. -10. Let's see if the bassline group is empty. Yes. Okay, and then what we do, we simply use the bus, and to find the best loudness spot for an element, I would advise you to first put the fader to -infinity, then sweep it up until you find the best position, then look at the value, then do the same thing with the opposite when it's too loud, and then go back to it until it sounds good. See where it sits, remember the value, and then take the middle of both. That's maybe the most objective way I can imagine. Something like -4. Then we make it the opposite. Then I have this one, and so let's take the middle, like -2. And to find the right volume, it's also a listening process. You simply have to train your ears, simply listen as much as possible on very good produced music through your system and through your environment. And then you, after 1 year, after 2 years, you simply start to know the room, how it sounds. You know if elements are too loud or too quiet. It's a learning process, so it takes some time. Okay, the bass also sounds pretty good already. I think it's already a bounced bass, but I will try to still process it a little bit so you see my method. Usually I would start with an clean EQ, and first of all I would sweep the frequency spectrum. Maybe here it's not much, the bass already sounds good, but maybe just a little bit, and to be honest the rest sounds great. Then regarding the sub bass, for kick and bass it's always a combination between kick and bass, and I always would advise you the best thing to get the right sub bass is to use a reference track for your project. Let's search for a reference track. Okay, now I have loaded up a reference track. Of course, I took my own one from my first album. This one has a similar bass line. And now to get the sub bass level right, we simply compare the bass line to a commercial track. In this case, it's my one. What's very important is always compare at the same volume, otherwise it doesn't make sense. Now let's first adjust the volume. And now what we can do, there are different tricks. One trick is stand in the corner of your studio room and then compare the two tracks. How does the bass line sound in the corner of your studio room? In your studio room. Why in your studio room? Because in corners normally the low frequencies gets overwhelmed in an intensive way. So it's a good way to check your low frequencies while standing in corners. Then what you also can try is you take the master channel and you apply a high cut on the master channel, something like 100 Hertz, and then simply compare the low end. In this case, it's not a good reference track because the reference track it sounds pretty different, but you get but I'm just showing you techniques which you have to study for yourself and you have to apply for yourself. Then how do I process the low end for the kick and the bass? There's always two things. Sometimes I use a low cut. You can use a low cut or you can use a low shelf, and you can use both of course. In this case we don't need one, but how I treat the low end is always through a low cut or a low shelf or a combination of both. Personally, I use most of the time a low cut of 12 dB per octave. I don't use very sharp ones. If it needs a sharp one, it's a combination of a low cut and a low shelf. Something like this, that I make a low cut on 30 Hertz and the low shelf on 30 Hertz and the low cut on 50 Hertz. Something like this. Then what's also part of processing the low end is compression, because if I apply a compressor to a bass line, the compressor will always make the low end a little bit tighter if you don't use a sidechain input on the compressor. So simply let's check it out. Let's use a Renaissance compressor here. And what you're gonna hear is it's always the same effect, that that the bass gets a little bit more aggressive in the mid-range. There are some overtones which are the compressor brings out overtones, and here I don't like the effect. But if the bass line is too loose in the low end, I think it's nice to add a little bit of compression on the bass, something like this setup here, a ratio of 3:1, and then just a little bit of gain reduction, something like 1 or 2 dBs. Okay, then the same goes for the bassline group processing. If you add compression to the bassline group, what it also does, if you don't apply the sidechain input on the compressor, it again makes the low end a little bit more compact, a little bit more tight. That's why I also like to compress in more than 50% of the cases, to compress the bass lines just in a subtle way and just for gluing it together and to make the low end a little bit more tight.